Welcome to the Hello Seattle podcast, a local perspective on living in and moving to Seattle.
Yeah, we're excited to introduce you to people, places, and communities that make living in our hometown special. Hello, Seattle. My name is Dan Keller, and I'm your host.
And I'm your other host, Zach McDonald, a real estate agent here in the Seattle area. And today, we're going to talk about some big changes to real estate law in Washington State.
This can be a good one. I'm planning on learning a little from this as well. I think I've seen this come out in the news a lot lately, but the funny thing is every time I talk with local real estate agents about this topic, they're all kind of like, yeah, we're a part of the Northwest Multiple Listing Service where we've kind of already protected ourselves against a lot of these lawsuits that you're seeing in the news because of disclosures and how you guys have talked about this for the last year or so. But as a mortgage professional, we dealt with this exact same battle over compensation, if you will, or regulation over compensation way back in 2012, coming out of the last housing collapse and economic collapse. And so I think this is healthy. I mean, your opinion on it may be a little bit different, but me having gone through this and seeing what it did to the mortgage industry, listen, at the end of the day, Zach, it's all about the consumer.
Yep.
Protecting them financially and preventing them from making poor decisions or getting overcharged. So I think this is going to be good, but I think there does need to be some clarity around these changes.
For sure. And I think you mentioned, the compensation conversation, and in the news, that's what people are hearing about. They're hearing about compensation in the real estate space, listings, buyers, and Washington has been ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. I think with talking about compensation, disclosing compensation, and the agreement we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the Buyer Brokerage Services Agreement is what it's called.
Okay.
That's what we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
And this agreement talks about compensation. It makes you talk about it, which is good.
Yeah.
It's hard to have disclosure, and that's what your industry has done a really good job with, is disclosing fees and rates and costs, all those things. And we've talked about it on this show.
Yeah.
And those were not conversations that most mortgage lenders were having with their buyers. And I don't think buyers agents have done a very good job in the real estate space talking about how compensation works and what they get paid, how they get paid, who pays them. So that's what these agreements and some of these new laws are forcing real estate agents to do, is just talk about this with your client.
Yeah.
I don't know if it changes things dramatically, but at least the conversation gets brought out
more
into the light.
transparency. I think that's what it changes. And what it does is it forces a conversation. So let's kind of start with this. The traditional past conversation in regards to compensation as a buyer's broker, like you're out representing a home buyer to purchase a home. I've heard so many agents in the past, and I've even been guilty of saying this, that, hey, Mr. or Mrs. Home Buyer, you don't pay the real estate agent anything. The seller, when they list their home, they pay both real estate agents commissions as a part of the listing agreement. Now, I know you do listings too.
I do,
so
listings
you know both
as well.
sides.
Yeah.
But traditionally, that's the end of the conversation. That's it. Like
I would say for most agents, that's about as far as the conversation goes.
Yeah.
You know what? Even 5-6 years ago, the listing agreement said, in Washington at least, the listing firm is agreeing to pay X percent. That's where you have the conversations about, well, I don't want to pay a 6% listing fee. I only want to pay 3%.
Yeah.
And it's because there wasn't really clarity about how much the agents were getting paid. And the way the listing agreement was worded is you would have the listing agreement would spell out what the percentage was, whether it was 4% or 5% or 6%, whatever it ended up being, right? Whatever was negotiated between the listing firm and the seller. And then a percentage of that would be shared. I would say it was usually 50% was what was shared with the buyer brokerage firm.
Okay.
So if there was let's say there's a 5% commission, half of that was shared, each firm would get 2.5%.
Okay.
But if there wasn't a buyer brokerage firm, then the listing firm would just keep the entire commission. So that's how the other agreements were worded. That was changed and updated. And it's been updated a few different times recently to say that, hey, this is how much the listing firm is being compensated, right?
Okay.
Again, that's all negotiable between agents and firms and then the client. And then there was also a line item for the buyers. This is how much the buyer brokerage firm is going to be compensated. So the sellers, I don't think the sellers understood that they were paying buyer brokers either in Washington State. So that gave clarity to who's getting paid and how much they're getting paid. And also, hey, what happens if the listing firm does represent in some type of dual agency both sides?
Yeah.
How much do they get? Do they still get compensated the entire amount, or is there some reduction in that fee? So that all became a conversation topic. But there was still a lot of mystery about how buyers agents are compensated to buyers.
Yeah.
The commissions were then in Washington State published online. So you could go on Redfin or Zillow and see what the commissions are being offered. I at first thought that was a little interesting. It didn't really change much, I don't think, but at least there was some type of disclosure about what the commission was going to be and how, at least what the buyer agent was going to get paid. But now we have this buyer brokerage services agreement, and it forces a conversation between a buyer and a buyer broker about, okay, who's getting paid? How are they getting paid? Who is responsible for paying? I think it's a really great forum. There are going to be changes. I think there needs to be more clarity about what some of the wording means. And this is something that we can talk about here as we start. And the biggest change with this agreement is it's required now.
It forces a conversation.
There was a buyer agency agreement, or I think that was what it was called previously. And there was an agreement, and firms didn't require it usually. I know in our firm, most agents did not use the form because it wasn't required. An agency relationship was automatically assumed.
Let's talk about that real quick. What is that? Because I do know some real estate agents that I've done business with in the past as being their lender. They won't show a home to a new client. They'll sit down and meet with a client, but they won't go out and show properties or homes to a client without them signing that. So let's talk about what that is.
So the agreement.
The buyer agency agreement.
So the buyer agency agreement essentially establishes and formalizes the relationship between the buyer and the agent. The law previously was kind of nebulous, that there was some type of agency created by showing the house or doing real estate services, some type of implied or assumed agency. This gives clarity to it. And again, this form, there in a different version, did exist. And you mentioned some agents required it prior to showing houses. I did not use this form. I didn't require. I did start using it a few months ago before the law went into effect as a way of essentially just practicing it, right? We're all going to need it anyway. Might as well start using it now. I think the form in its previous version did a decent job of those types of conversations. I think agents in a lot of cases would show a house. Maybe they accidentally met somebody at an open house, or that person reached out online via Zillow or Redfin, whatever website it was. And they didn't necessarily want that person to be their agent. They just wanted to see the house, but then they somehow met this agent to see the house. And then that agent had an opportunity to get in front of the buyer, right? And in some cases, people would then write an offer on that house without ever sitting down and talking with this agent, interviewing this agent. They didn't know if this agent was experienced or professional. So for me, I did some type of a hybrid. Historically, I have asked buyers to meet with me in person first. Now, if they were already pre-approved and sent me a pre-approval letter and they wanted to go see a house, usually I would do that. It makes sense. Yeah, sure. Let's go see that one house together, and then let's do the meeting, right? If they weren't pre-approved, there's not really much point in going to see a house because you're not going to be able to take action on it quickly anyway. If it's Saturday at 3:00, you're not going to be able to make an offer on that house without your pre-approval done. And you're certainly not going to have it done on Saturday.
I do think it's important to understand this, or maybe hit pause on this conversation, because I think a lot of home buyers, I think a lot of people in general, including like even my wife, my family, I take for granted that I know this information, but people don't. They don't understand that most real estate agents don't get paid until you actually buy the home. That's why it's called a commission. And it's paid at the very end 100%. After the home loan, after the home purchase closes, whether you pay cash for the home or you get financing. And so this buyer agency agreement also protects your time. I mean, you're a successful real estate agent. I think your market knowledge and your ability to negotiate and help advise people through the process is very valuable.
I do too.
Right? And you've earned that with repetition and coaching and training and just experience. And so having that buyer's agency agreement's big. I think it's important. And I think it's important that the consumer understands it's important to protect a relationship, and set the tone for a relationship. Like, I am going to have a relationship with you. I'm going to be the one that you call. I'm going to be the one that's going to do all of these things.
Yes.
But I want to know that we're in this thing together, that we're committed.
Oh, for sure. And like I mentioned, I always would meet, and I still do this. There's nothing really is changing for me aside from now I'm having them sign this agreement versus essentially agreeing and handshake.
Being a little bit loose. Yeah.
Well, again, it wasn't required. And so I'm a man of my word, and I do assume the best in people, and it's a bit me a few times, but historically it's been great, right? And so just having that conversation, sitting down, going through needs and wants. Hey, what are you actually looking for in a house? Talking about the buying process. If somebody's been through it before, maybe just refreshing on it or explaining how it might be different working with me and with my team, and then formalizing the relationship.
Yep.
Are we a good fit? Am I the best fit for you? Do you see yourself working with me? And if that's the case, great. But we're going to do this together, and we would talk about it.
Yeah.
I've worked with clients exclusively. I'm not a big fan of, clients working with lots of different agents, and there are people that do that model, and that's fine. You can find them.
Yep.
But I want exclusivity. I want to know, hey, I'm going to spend my effort. I'm going to spend my time. I'm going to use my skill. And I think you're going to benefit from working with me. This is all the value I bring, but I want commitment, right?
Yeah. And I've watched you, Zach, meet with people and actually say that, hey, I don't think this is a good fit because you're, for example, looking in Tacoma or Federal Way, and that's just an area that you couldn't serve them at the highest level possible. So what you do is you make a great introduction to someone that's credible down there. I think the other thing that I think is really important to understand with real estate agents is too, everything that goes into, and this is kind of why we're doing this podcast today, so that if you are a home buyer or a first-time home buyer, understanding the role of a realtor, the role of a real estate agent, and also understanding these compensation laws too, maybe in advance versus then just getting this form, thrown at you, in your face. But it is important to understand too that, part of that upfront meeting is to make sure people like you that are credible are saying yes to the relationship because you can serve them at a high level. Make sure you protect them.
Yeah.
And if you can't, then
you talk about protection, right? There's protection on both sides. There's protection for the buyer, but there's also protection for the real estate agent. My biggest fear with this agreement is, and the requirement of this agreement is that people are going to sign it either in haste or by accident.
Yeah. They're going to get it pushed across the desk. They're not going to know what they're getting into or what they're signing.
Well, I had a conversation with somebody last week, and we're trying to figure this out as a real estate community. What does the wording mean? And this is the wording. I'm going to read it because I think this will give some clarity. It's not clear, but it says a written services agreement is required before or as soon as reasonably practical after a broker begins rendering real estate brokerage services to a buyer. Talk about nebulous. It is required to get it signed before or as soon as reasonably practical, right? That leaves a lot of room for interpretation, in my opinion. I'm not an attorney, and we're going to figure this out over time, what that means. But people, want to see a house. And I had a conversation with somebody like, hey, I want to go see a house. We've never met before.
Yeah.
Well, there's this agreement we need. I don't feel comfortable signing an agreement to go look at a house with you, which I wouldn't either. So I think that's some of the things that we need to work through as a real estate community and figure out when this agreement needs to be signed. I don't think it's good for a consumer to be required to sign an agreement to go look at a house when they haven't met the professional that then it binds them in some way to this professional, even if this professional is not any good, has a bad reputation. You might not know this up front before you go tour the house. So I think,
let me ask you this. Let's say that the customer, calls you up, not necessarily you, but I'm going to use you as an example.
This is hypothetical.
Hypothetical. Calls you up, found you online because you've got a great YouTube and you're on the news all the time. And they're like, Zach, I want to go see this house. And you're like, hey, have you been pre-approved? No, I'm all cash. Okay, cool. So now there's you're at the point where I'd like to verify funds. How do I know you're all cash? All that good stuff. But yeah, you know what? Hey, I'll go tour this home with you one time. Mm-hmm. You have them sign the buyer's agency agreement. You have them sign everything they're supposed to. And they come back to you 2 or 3 days later. That's not the right house, but they realize that for whatever reason, they don't want to work with you. Mm-hmm. Is there an X, or you, the flip side, you don't want to work with them. Is there a way out of this agreement?
There is.
Okay.
Yeah. It's easy too. It just requires notice from one of the parties.
Written notice, or is there a form, like an addendum form they have to sign?
I don't believe they need to sign a specific form. I need to look at that myself, right? This is very fresh. I haven't had that situation come up yet.
No, yeah, it's hypothetical, but I mean, I could see that being a question that a homebuyer might ask.
I have never forced anybody to stay in an agreement they weren't happy with, right? And sometimes that's come at my loss, right? I've had some listings that were coming up, and a neighbor came by, and so they wanted to buy it, and the person's like, I'm not listing. And I'm like, we've got an agreement. They're like, I don't really care. I want to sell it to this person. Stuff like that happens. Okay. And it's not really worth, at least to me, it's not really worth fighting over it.
Yeah.
And the same thing with buyers. Every once in a while, it's not working out. I mean, you don't want to stay in a relationship where everybody's unhappy. Yeah. So for me, I want my clients to have a great experience. If they're not, I want to talk about it. And if we can't work through it, then I think it's probably better to part ways. So the law makes it easy to get out of the agreement. And also I personally would let somebody out if it wasn't working out.
So consumers, it's important, home buyers, it's important to know that if you wanted out of it, there's a way out. Now, where it could get dicey is if you wanted out of it after a purchase and sale contract was executed. That's going to be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, I think you're in it. Yeah. But the other part would be is if you went and toured a house with somebody and you signed the agreement, but then you decided that you wanted to work with somebody else to buy that same house. There I think again, that's where the agreement protects the agent, because their agent did use their effort, and even if it was minimal, they still did this service and they showed the house or they found it. Again, there's a lot of debate around those different conversation topics, because things happen all the time where somebody changes their mind or they decide to buy it 2 weeks later with somebody else.
Yeah.
And the agreement will help solve that problem too.
Yeah. I know with new construction, for example, if you don't register at a new construction site and you come back and write an offer with a realtor, that site agent that showed you around is in their contract is going to get a portion of that commission. So
that might change too.
Yeah, that could. Yeah. I mean, now they're going to have to.
If I have an agreement with my client and they go to this open house for the builder, and the builder says, well, they came in on their own. It's like, well, I have a buyer broker agreement with my client and I am representing them.
There you go. Wow. I didn't even think of
that.
When
we make the offer, that's what that agreement is for, is it gives me, first of all, I've had it happen very few times because I talk about this with clients, but there's been a few occasions where a client goes into a builder project. I don't think I've ever had a builder say, oh no, sorry, you can't represent your client. But there have been a few times where they go in and they end up just buying the house that way, and I'm not involved, and sometimes accidentally, sometimes on purpose, based on what was said by the builder side agent. But in those cases, if I have an agreement with the client, I get to still help represent them in the process because of that agreement, and they get the benefit of having somebody on their team versus the builder's site agent. So I wonder how that's going to go, because the agreement also stipulates what happens if there isn't compensation offered or there isn't the amount of compensation that's agreed to in the agreement. And in some cases that is asking the seller or the builder, if we're talking about a builder, for additional compensation to be paid to the agent. So
should we talk about that? So let's say if there's zero compensation offered by the seller, what is that? And you have a buyer's agency agreement saying that, your compensation is, I'm just going to say this, 3%, which is fairly standard.
We're not supposed to say that anymore.
You're not. Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah.
No, we're not supposed to
That
say
it's quote unquote standard, but you do have to disclose.
It's all negotiable.
It's all negotiable.
Yeah.
Okay.
So every commission is negotiable, and it's agreed to between seller and their client, buyer and their client.
Okay.
There's no standard commission rates.
So you don't say that anymore.
Nope.
Yeah.
That's why National Association of Realtors is getting sued a bunch of money, and a lot of the companies that are part of it,
because they implied a standard.
They implied a standard.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean that in any field there should be people that get paid more and there should be people that get paid less. Yeah. And that's in real estate. You see some companies are offering discounts, other companies are offering lower fees, some are asking for higher fees, but there has been this National Association of Realtors has been part of this, and a lot of the companies in it. It's like, hey, this is as an industry what we are wanting to get paid, whether people were good or not. It's like, hey, I'm licensed at this firm, and this is what we charge at our firm, and it's like, well, you're brand new and you don't have any competency, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense that person gets paid the same. At least that's not how it works in the real world.
Yeah, and I look at these changes, Zach, as a great opportunity and as a way in which the better are going to get paid the same or what they've been getting paid.
Or more. They get paid what they deserve.
But I think the ones that aren't certain of their value, that don't know their value, that haven't put in the work, because trust me, I can sit down with a guy like you with all of your experience, your ability to negotiate and understand the market, all of that, and understand your value to get what you want to be paid in regards to compensation, commission. Okay. I could also go grab another real estate agent that maybe refers me buyers that I know and sit down and say the same thing. I'm wanting to work with you, but I'm only willing to pay X, and they don't know how to have that conversation. So they're going to settle for, if you will, or get paid much less than you.
They're going to get paid what they were worth. Yeah. That's how it works. I think in any other business, I mean, we're doing a big remodel at our house, and some people charge more and some people charge less, and some people provide a lot more value and some people provide less. And usually the amount of value and the payment is commensurate. Yeah. It's not always, and you have to make that judgment. But
this is giving you an opportunity to
you got to do some due diligence.
There you go.
I think historically speaking, sellers have done a way better job of due diligence with their real estate agents. Yeah. Outside of maybe, hey, I've got a family or a friend that does real estate and I'm just going to work with them because of that. But in general, sellers have done a better job of due diligence when it comes to choosing their agent than buyers have done choosing their agent.
Yeah.
And statistically speaking, buyers work with the first person they meet with.
Yep.
And sellers too.
Yep.
But the due diligence is going to be more important because you're signing something. Sellers have always had to sign an agreement to list their property with a real estate agent. And now buyers are required to do the same.
I love it.
That would make me do due diligence, right?
I really like you. Yeah.
You're like,
I mean, it's like you're listing your house, for example, and you got someone that comes over and you look at their portfolio or you look at their listings online and you can clearly tell that they took their listing photos with an iPhone. And then you got you coming over and you're doing drone footage and video tours and professional photography, and you're hiring your landscaper to come up and tune up the landscaping and all this stuff.
Right? It's different.
And you're charging the same. Well, I'm going to go with you.
Yeah. And if I was charging more, you might still pay me more.
There you go. Yeah.
Right.
And it's the same thing working with buyers. I think if you're listening to this and you're a buyer, I've been in the mortgage industry for 16 years and I've seen this firsthand. When you're working with a professional that knows the market, and I'm going to hit this home, if you know the market and you know market stats and you know real estate and you've got experience negotiating and understanding contracts, it doesn't matter. I mean, I'm going to say it does matter, but paying a buyer's agent a full commission and what they want, that's good. They
can't say that anymore. We can't say full commission anymore.
You can't say that word. Paying a buyer's agent the commission that they put on a piece of paper on a contract, it's worth it. You're going to get that plus.
It's worth paying. It's worth paying for a professional. Yeah, you can pay for an amateur too.
I've seen amateurs with clients that I've done the home loan pre-approval work with an amateur, an online real estate agent, and I've watched how they've left $10,000, $20,000+ on the table by not having someone represent them properly.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of data around how it's valuable to have a real estate professional represent you in a purchase or in a sale, right? And there's a lot of stats about for sale by owner or the same thing on a buyer side.
Yeah.
And again, the big change here is just this requirement for a buyer and their agent to be under contract together and having clarity about the relationship, clarity about how people are being paid, what they're being paid. So there's not any surprises. And we've talked about this. There's not and this is an adjustment for all of us. There's not any type of standard commission. There's not a full commission or a half commission. That's not how it works. Those are words that have been used for a long time.
Yeah.
And
I mean, look at me. I just got corrected on 2 of them.
Yeah. Well, I have to correct you.
I know.
Or else I'm going to get in trouble.
No,
we're all going to get in trouble, right? And that's not the point. The point is that buyers should have the ability to work with somebody that they want to work with and pay what they want to pay. And the agreement is going to just bring those conversations about. And so far, what I've experienced is that sellers are still offering the compensation. They're not required to, though. And they haven't been in Washington for a few years, I believe. But in other states, they've been required still.
Yeah.
And so, and it could have been $1, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be a certain percentage.
Yeah.
But there was some requirement, and our MLS removed that a few years ago so that there was no requirement to offer compensation. But I've still seen that in general, that there's still compensation being offered and an incentive to bring their clients by.
Yep.
But I think, again, we're going to see how this all shakes out. And there have been lots of changes in the real estate industry over the years. And, I think in general, they've been good for the consumers.
They're all good. And the reason why there is change is we're getting more technologically savvy. I think that was the right word.
I think that's what you were going for.
More efficient. I think that, and I mean, you look at some of these price points and what goes into, if you go in some markets, you look at what goes into selling and marketing the sale of a home. On your end, what goes into showing homes and educating that particular home buyer. These changes are necessary. At the end of the day, like I said at the very beginning, it's disclosure. It's a conversation, it's transparency, and it's disclosing information that I think is important.
Yeah. And that's why we're talking about it here on the podcast, because if somebody's thinking about moving to Seattle, or maybe they're newer to the area and they're thinking about buying a place, even renting a place, some of the laws have changed there too. It might be different in a different state. Some states have required this buyer agency agreement for a long time. Some may be adopting it here more recently, just like Washington. I'm not as familiar about the national laws. But some people might be coming from a market where that's not normal, and now they are being asked to sign this agreement. And I've experienced that with some past clients that are like, oh, we have to sign this agreement now. And then we talk about it, but we didn't have to talk about it before. So it's just different. Now, in the past, I had told them, I'm not going to ask you to sign an agreement. Some people ask, are we going to sign one? We can if you want. Everybody's like, well, no, if I don't need to. But now that they need to, we're making those changes. So I think there's going to be some adapting to this from agents and also from the clients. But I wanted to ask you this here before we wrap up. We definitely forgot to talk about the mortgage update and the real estate update. We're a little excited to get into this topic. And I don't think we need to necessarily do that here today. We can. This seems like a pretty big real estate update. But I wanted to get your opinion. If people are listening to this or watching this maybe on YouTube and they're thinking about, wow, I have to sign a buyer brokerage agreement now. Do you have any advice for them on what they should be looking for in somebody helping them with a purchase of real estate? You work with a lot of different agents. What are some of the things that you personally would want to see if you were going to say, hey, I want to commit to working with you and I want to commit to paying you potentially, even if the listing doesn't offer the compensation fully or doesn't offer any? What would your advice be to somebody in that situation? And what should they be looking for in a real estate agent?
Well, I'm going to answer that from a homeowner myself who has relocated in 2017. My wife and I relocated from Lake Stevens to Shoreline, Edmonds Woodway area. And so having to relocate to a new area, I think there's a handful of things. I'll give you 5 big things that I think every home buyer needs to identify in choosing when they choose their realtor. Number 1, okay, do you have a relationship? Can you see yourself working with them? Okay. Because you're going to spend a lot of time with them.
Yeah.
So I don't want to say you don't have to like them. Okay. But you have to have done some due diligence up front. Have you gone and looked at their website? Have you gone and checked out online reviews? Can they prove that they have been successful in the marketplace? Okay. That's client testimonials. That's statistics for closings. So do you feel comfortable and confident working with that person? Okay. That's number one. Number two, I think a great buyer's agent knows the community that they're showing you homes in. And when I say knows the home, they know what type of homes are in that community, single family homes, townhomes, condos, and they know specifically, again, they can prove that they know specifically from experience and education. If, for example, you're looking at condos, there's a lot that goes into buying a condo, understanding the HOA, understanding the resale certificate, understanding the project, the location, all the reasons why you would want to live in a condo.
Certainly.
For example, so understanding the community. Another part of understanding the community, Zach, and I know you know this, is schools. Okay, if this particular person has a family, understanding and being able to give information on schools. The other thing which we could put understanding the community, but I could also say this is number three. When you buy a home, your job's not done. Think of it this way, people. You use Zach to buy your first home. What happens next winter when we get freezing temperatures like we had this winter and your pipes freeze and they burst? Who are you going to call? If your brother or brother-in-law is not a plumber, most of the time my clients are calling me because I have a great relationship with them, or they're calling their agent. Are you connected to local plumbers, roofers, landscapers, contractors, floor people, all of those amenities? A good buyer's agent has connections. Okay.
I would agree.
And a good buyer's agent is going to stay in touch with you too and help you manage the journey of home ownership.
Okay. Would you say that's a separate bullet point?
Yeah, I'd say that's probably 3 or 4.
Okay.
And then one more, whether we're on 4 or 5 right now, I lost track. I think being able to negotiate is huge. And I've watched you do this. I've actually been able to watch you do this over the last 4 or 5 years because we're in the same business coaching program together. We have been. And a big part of that is understanding and learning how, because they don't, again, most real estate agents, when they get into real estate, they're coming from another career, or they're, they like to build, or they like real estate, or they're investors like you.
Yeah.
Okay. But they don't teach you how to negotiate. You didn't go to law school to learn how to negotiate in a courtroom.
I almost did.
You did go to a school that does have a great law program. But my purpose in telling you that is a buyer's agent that knows how to negotiate on your behalf, incredible asset, can save you a lot of money and help make you a lot of money. I think that's really big. And then I think lastly, and I think this is so important with a real estate agent. I think credibility is really big.
Yep.
I think someone that is going to morally and ethically do the right thing for you and stand by your side both during, through, and after the transaction is big. And these are qualities that I particularly would look for in a real estate agent myself. And I've seen these qualities in people like you and other great agents that I've had the opportunity to work with. They have no problem winning in a market. They have no problem winning when guidelines and things change like this, because they've already got that base skill set.
Yeah. And I think one thing as I'm listening to this, I'm hearing comfortable and confident. Those are things I actually talk about with people. I want them to be comfortable and confident about the process, working together, and in relationship, right, is what you talked about. And then you talked about knowing the community, connections, that's relationship. Stays in touch with them afterwards, relationship. Credibility, I mean, kind of the basis of relationship. And then you got negotiation in there. So it almost sounds like you can see yourself in a relationship with this person. And they know the community and they know how to negotiate.
That's it.
I mean, you could boil it down to 3 points almost.
Amen. Yep.
Well, one thing that I know is that people will hopefully do more due diligence when they're choosing their agent, especially with the requirement to sign something. And my hope is that this actually causes buyers to have a better experience. Right? And that's what I always want. I want clients to not only have success, but I want them to have a great experience. And I think this will help elevate the experience for buyers. I think it will hopefully elevate the experience for agents as well, working with buyers. I think just clarity is really, really helpful. And commitment is also really helpful in any type of relationship, right? And then, my other hope is that there will be a higher standard for real estate agents. They will be held to a higher standard.
Yep.
Because if buyers are signing an agreement and committing formally to what their agent's going to get paid, and also just committing to their agent, I think there's got to be a higher standard set and a bar that's raised and elevated. It's not just, hey, you can open the door and you sign some paperwork. Cool.
Yeah.
That's one level of real estate, right?
Yep.
And you talk about these other things like, can you help me have success in my purchase? Can you help me negotiate? Can you help me navigate the process? Can you help me to have a great experience? Can you stay in touch with me? Can you keep me informed on the market? Can you help me not just make my first purchase, but my second and my third purchase? Can you help me sell there's a relationship that can be established here, long-term, not just short-term. So I hope that in the long run, that although it's going to take some adjusting for agents and also for home buyers too, learning how this all works, I hope that the experience for buyers in Washington is better because of it.
It will be. Yeah, it will be. One thing for sure is change in our industries.
Yeah, change is always happening. And it's going to happen whether we want it to happen or not. And so I think being part of the change is, in my opinion, the better place to be.
Well, being out front and not afraid to have these conversations about change and what it means is so important. And that's why, we're here today doing this. We're ahead of the game on this.
Yeah. And if you are listening to this and you want to talk about it more, I'm not a real estate attorney, so I think I should say that. I can't give you advice on the law and how to interpret it, but I'm happy to dialogue with you about some of these changes and even talk about buying a house here in Washington, if that's what you want to do. So, we really value your attention, and we're glad that you tuned in here today, and we'll wrap it up there. So goodbye, Seattle.
Bye, Seattle.